All right, the White House has said that the U.S. President Donald Trump will leave the G7 summit early due to the Israel-Iran war. Now, this comes after he warned residents of Tehran to flee. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt wrote on X that Donald Trump will be leaving after dinner with heads of state due to the war. Meanwhile, U.S. officials says U.S. President Donald Trump will not sign a draft statement from Group of 7 leaders calling for de-escalation of the Israel-Iran conflict. The draft statement also commits to safeguard market stability, including energy markets, says Iran must never have a nuclear weapon and that Israel has the right to defend itself. Canadian and European diplomats say G7 attendees are continuing discussions on the conflict at the summit in Canada, which ends tomorrow. So this is the latest that we're getting right now. The White House has said that President Donald Trump will be leaving the G7 summit early due to the war in West Asia, the conflict that we're seeing between Israel and Iran, who have continued to trade blows for the 4th consecutive day. All right, for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani joins us from New York. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, Donald Trump to leave the G7 summit early. What can you tell us, Susan?
Well, and we are now getting updates that his National Security Council team is going to be ready here in the United States. He's going to leave after the family photo at the G7 and also dinner. He's summoned the National Security Council, his top brass cabinet members, to meet immediately. Now, I just heard an interview on Fox News with Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary. The question posed to him was, of course, prior to this NSC meeting, whether or not President Trump is still open to some sort of negotiation with Iran regarding its nuclear program. And Hegseth definitively said, yes, the doors of negotiation and diplomacy are still open. However, the question remains for how long, considering the fact that President Trump, as you mentioned just a while ago, called on the residents of Tehran to evacuate immediately. He said Iran should have signed that deal.
Right, absolutely. Now we're also getting some reports that there may be some sort of action after he leaves the G7 summit. As you mentioned, the National Security Cabinet will be ready once he is back after that family photo that does happen. Now, when it comes to diplomacy, Susan, what are the odds that the sides will come on the negotiating table and perhaps go ahead with a negotiated or a diplomatic solution?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. We are hearing reports, and throughout the day here, we were hearing reports, various reports from different outlets and sources saying that the Iranians have actually reached out to their Arab intermediaries and allies, calling on them to either speak with Israel, those that have normalized relations, or mediate with the United States, sending a message that Iran is indeed willing to come back to the negotiating table and is willing to make some concessions. This was first reported by the Wall Street Journal, and then it followed by other media outlets. On the other hand, we hear Donald Trump saying that he still hopes some kind of negotiation is possible. Of course, these reports come in the backdrop of no halt, literally, at least for the past 12 hours of strikes between Iran and Israel. There has been constant back and forth between the two sides threatening one another. There was a report that Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called, again, some neighboring countries and intermediaries. He also mentioned this actually on social media, that all the United States has to do is make a phone call to Israel and Israel would stop its bombardment and strikes against Iran. Of course, it's very unlikely that President Trump would ask Prime Minister Netanyahu to do that at this point, considering the fact that the situation just seems to be getting tenser by the day.
Right, absolutely, Susan. Of course, thank you so much for bringing us the latest on this right now. This is a fast developing situation. We are seeing back and forth blows by both sides for a fourth consecutive day now. Of course, how things pan out going forward, that is something that remains to be seen. Also from Washington, D.C., we are now being joined by Mr. Peter Kuznick, Professor of History and Director of Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. Professor Kuznick, thank you so much for joining us on WION World as One. I want to first begin by asking you what your assessment assessment of the current situation in West Asia is?
The situation grows more and more precarious by the hour. Israel by itself cannot destroy Iran's nuclear program, which means that it can inflict damage and has inflicted damage, especially at the above ground facilities like at Natanz and even at Isfahan, but the deeply buried facilities like at Fordo, the Israeli bombs can't really touch. So Israel has been trying to convince the United States to come into the war. The United States has these massive 30,000-pound, 20-foot-long bunker buster bombs. And the U.S., if it repeatedly drops them at the Fordo facility, one after another in that same hole, it can get deep enough, a half-mile underground, possibly to destroy that. What concerns me is that Israel is so desperate to get the United States into this war that Israel might do what Trump has said would bring the U.S. in, and that would be if U.S. assets and facilities in the region get attacked by Iran. Now, Israel has the capability of conducting a false flag operation, make it look like Iran was attacking one of the U.S. facilities, but Israel actually being the one to do so, convincing Trump that the Iranians had done so, and then the United States coming into the war and taking out the Iranian nuclear facilities. If this war ends with Iran still having its nuclear capability, then this is a loss for Israel. Netanyahu's been saying that this is an existential threat to Israel, which is not true. There is no imminent threat from Iran to Israel. Iran is still way off from developing a nuclear weapon. However, if Netanyahu means that, and the Israeli people believe that, then there's also the possibility that Israel could use its own nuclear weapons to take out that Fordo plant. So there's a lot of very dangerous possibilities. The situation now is precarious, but it can only get worse. So we do need to sit down and negotiate. Likely, the Iranian negotiator will be Foreign Minister Araghchi. We saw that among the initial Iranian leaders who were killed by Israel was Shimkhani, who was the Iranian negotiator to begin with. One of Israel's goals is to sidetrack these negotiations, these attempts to get a diplomatic solution. I worry that Israel may try to assassinate Foreign Minister Araghchi because he's the likely one to conduct Iran's negotiations if the United States proceeds on that path.
All right, Mr. Kuznick, please just stay on with us. We have some breaking news that's coming in right now. Please stay on with us.